A brake failure that nearly ended his race. A team exposed under the lights of Marina Bay. A problem Ferrari tried to hide until Hamilton revealed it. And now the truth is out. The moment the brakes failed in Singapore was more than a mechanical collapse. It was a moment of truth. When Lewis Hamilton's voice cracked through the radio, shouting, "I can't stop the car, man." The pedal's gone. It wasn't just a driver in distress. It was a warning that had come too late. Inside the Ferrari garage, engineers froze. The data confirmed what Hamilton had felt since Friday. Temperatures beyond tolerance, the brake-by-wire system confused, the car dangerously close to failure. But in Formula One, truth doesn't come from the data first. It comes from the driver. And that night, Ferrari finally had to listen. When Hamilton climbed out of the SF-25, the images told story words didn't need to. The front brakes glowed red, almost molten, the carbon discs warped and cracking under the heat. He took a long look at the car before turning away. It wasn't anger in his face, it was resignation. He had spent the entire weekend warning of this exact outcome. The engineers had told him the numbers were stable. The car had told him otherwise. And now, the evidence was burning in front of them. Ferrari had built a car that refused to learn from its own driver. In the minutes that followed, the paddock buzzed with speculation. Reporters asked whether Hamilton had pushed too hard, overheated the system, or braked too late. But the replays silenced that narrative instantly. He hadn't made an error. He'd been managing temperatures for half the race. Every time he coasted into corners, it was to protect a system that refused to protect itself. The footage of him pumping the brake pedal down the straight became one of the most symbolic moments of the season, a 7-time world champion trying to keep a legendary team's car alive by feel alone. Inside the Ferrari motorhome, the debrief was quiet, clinical, and cold. Engineers talked about thermal oscillations, brake pressure imbalance, and unexpected degradation patterns. Hamilton talked about feel, instinct, and human error. "It's not about brake maps," he told them. "It's about airflow. We're choking it." His words hung in the room, direct but calm. It wasn't an outburst, it was clarity. The issue wasn't mechanical anymore, it was cultural. Ferrari trusted equations more than experience, spreadsheets more than senses. And Hamilton, perhaps more than anyone in that room, knew that Formula One doesn't reward teams that forget how to feel. That debrief marked the moment Hamilton stopped trying to adapt to Ferrari and started forcing Ferrari to adapt to him. He was done softening his language to fit into their structure. He had joined the Scuderia to rebuild it, not to repeat its mistakes. His engineers saw the shift immediately. His tone changed on the radio. His debriefs became firmer, more assertive, almost surgical. He wasn't asking for fixes, he was demanding accountability. For a team that had grown comfortable with polite diplomacy, Hamilton's precision felt almost revolutionary. The turning point wasn't just about one race or one failure. It was about perspective. Hamilton had exposed a truth Ferrari didn't want to face. Their car wasn't losing because of luck or circumstance. It was losing because it wasn't built to endure pressure. The SF-25's beauty was skin deep, its weakness fundamental. And when that weakness finally revealed itself under the floodlights of Marina Bay, the man who saw it first was the one who had been ignored the longest. Ferrari arrived in Singapore believing they had found stability. The SF-25 had been consistent enough on high-speed circuits, efficient enough in cooler climates, and reliable enough to convince the factory in Maranello that development could pause until 2026. But that illusion, built on simulations and optimism, fell apart under the heat of Marina Bay. The car that had seemed refined on paper became fragile in reality. The issue wasn't a part that failed or a single strategic blunder. It was the design philosophy itself, the belief that aerodynamic gain could outrun thermal physics. Hamilton felt the consequences immediately. During the opening stint, he sensed the car fighting itself, the brakes overheating, the tires unable to shed energy, the cockpit growing hotter with every lap. Ferrari's engineers had asked him to lift and coast, a phrase that in racing language means surrender. To the pit wall, it was a precaution. To Hamilton, it was confirmation. The SF-25's beautiful bodywork, sculpted for downforce, was choking the systems that kept it alive. What he experienced through the pedal was not driver error, it was engineering arrogance. Inside the garage, the numbers told the wrong story. The software predicted that cooling margins were within tolerance. The models said the car would hold. But simulations are blind to the feeling of a brake pedal softening under pressure or the millisecond of lag before it bites again. That's what Hamilton kept reporting, a sense that the system was losing confidence. Yet every time he raised it, the replies came back in code. Temperatures stable. Continue as planned. The plan, he realized, was the problem. Ferrari's leadership had made a strategic choice that now looked reckless. They had frozen major updates in order to redirect wind tunnel hours toward their next-generation chassis. It was a gamble disguised as patience, a bet that the current car was good enough to carry them through the year. But Formula One never stops evolving. While rivals refined their cooling solutions and brake-by-wire calibrations, Ferrari waited. By Singapore, the rest of the grid had adapted to heat and traffic. Ferrari had not. The SF-25 wasn't a step behind, it was conceptually out of step. Hamilton's frustration grew with every lap, not because he expected perfection, but because he recognized the flaw for what it was: systemic. He could feel how the airflow around the front suspension starved the brake ducts, how the car lost temperature control the moment it sat in another car's dirty air. It wasn't something a software patch or pit stop adjustment could fix. It was built into the DNA of the car. Ferrari's engineers looked at graphs. Hamilton felt physics. By the end of the race weekend, the evidence was undeniable. The SF-25's braking instability wasn't a mystery. It was a mirror reflecting Ferrari's priorities. They had built a machine that looked fast but couldn't sustain aggression. In chasing aerodynamic elegance, they had sacrificed resilience. And the man who exposed it wasn't a rival analyst or a rival driver. It was the 7-time world champion they had hired to restore glory. The problem wasn't that Hamilton failed Ferrari in Singapore. It was that Ferrari failed to listen to Hamilton before Singapore ever began. Ferrari's SF-25 was a masterpiece in theory, an aerodynamic sculpture born from thousands of hours in Maranello's wind tunnels. It generated immense downforce, gliding through corners with stability and poise. But in the pursuit of aerodynamic perfection, Ferrari had made a compromise that would become fatal in Singapore. They had built a car that couldn't breathe. The cooling architecture, designed to maximize airflow beneath the floor and along the bodywork, left the braking system gasping for survival. The balance between drag and cooling, the invisible war in modern Formula One design, had been lost. The engineers believed they had managed it. On paper, the numbers looked flawless. Temperatures in simulation stayed within safe margins, and the car's heat rejection rates were comparable to Red Bull's. But Formula One is not run on paper. It's run in motion, in heat, humidity, and the chaos of traffic. The SF-25 was optimized for clean air. In the turbulent wake of Singapore's stop-start circuit, it became trapped in its own design. The brake ducts, too narrow and aerodynamically shaped for efficiency, couldn't deliver the airflow needed to cool the carbon discs. As a result, the system overheated not in bursts, but progressively, lap after lap, until the driver's touch became irrelevant. Hamilton felt it long before the data did. He didn't need temperature graphs or brake pressure telemetry. He could sense it through the pedal, the millimeter-by-millimeter delay between pressure and bite. To an ordinary driver, it might have felt like a small imbalance. To Hamilton, it was a ticking clock. The SF-25 wasn't degrading, it was decaying. Each time he entered a braking zone, he could feel the fluid expand, the system losing its consistency, the car whispering its warning. But inside Ferrari's garage, engineers reassured him. Numbers look good. Continue as planned. They were calm because their data was calm. What they couldn't see was that physics had already left their calculations behind. The real brilliance and the tragedy of Hamilton's insight was his understanding of why it was happening. He knew exactly what the car was doing to itself. The aerodynamic balance that gave it such beautiful rotation through the mid-corner was starving the rear brake assembly of oxygen. The system was literally suffocating under its own performance. Ferrari's pursuit of aerodynamic purity had created a thermal bottleneck. It wasn't a failure of parts. It was a failure of philosophy, a team that designed for speed at the expense of endurance. When the brake-by-wire system finally gave out on lap 59, the moment wasn't a surprise to Hamilton. It was confirmation. The SF-25's rear brake temperature had exceeded 900 degrees Celsius. The hydraulic system was boiling, and the electronic module, unable to reconcile front and rear pressure, simply shut down. To the engineers, it looked like a sudden fault. To Hamilton, it was inevitability, the conclusion to a problem he had been feeling since the first lap of qualifying. When he shouted, "I can't stop the car," into the radio, it wasn't panic. It was exasperation. The machine had reached the point where even mastery couldn't compensate. Ferrari's engineers worked tirelessly to explain the incident, producing pages of data and simulations that pointed to a rare combination of conditions. But those conditions weren't rare at all. They were Singapore, the kind of environment Formula One cars must survive. The problem wasn't the circuit, it was the concept. Hamilton had tried to tell them, it's not the brakes, it's the airflow. But in a team built on hierarchy and process, intuition often loses to statistics. The numbers looked stable. The driver did not.